A poor single mother counts her last coins on the flight until a CEO sitting nearby changes her life. Enjoy the story. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. The roar of the Gulfstream's engines was a familiar lullaby to Julian Vance, a sound synonymous with power, speed, and the relentless pursuit of more. From his vantage point 30,000 feet above the earth, the world below was an abstract map of assets and opportunities. He tapped a manicured finger on the screen of his tablet, the numbers of a multi-billion-dollar merger glowing in the hermetically sealed quiet of the cabin. A flight attendant, flawless and silent, refilled his glass with water he knew cost more per bottle than most people's weekly groceries. He didn't notice. Such details were the background radiation of his life, as unremarkable as the air he breathed. His focus was absolute, his world condensed to profit margins and shareholder value. He was the master of his universe, a kingdom of steel and glass he had built with brutal efficiency. A sharp, unfamiliar vibration rattled his glass. He looked up, annoyed. The jet was descending far too early. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, apologetic and deferential. A minor but non-negotiable issue with the hydraulic system. They would be landing at the nearest major airport for an immediate inspection. Julian's jaw tightened. A delay was not a possibility. It was an insult. The deal in San Francisco wouldn't wait. It was the culmination of a year of hostile negotiations, a corporate conquest that would cement his legacy. Failure to appear in person was not an option. He was Julian Vance. The world bent to his will. But today a simple mechanical failure refused to yield. His head of logistics, a man paid an astronomical salary to prevent such inconveniences, was already on the satellite phone, his voice a frantic buzz of apologies and frantic rebookings. The verdict was grim. There was one option and one option only if he wanted to make it to the signing on time, a commercial flight departing in less than an hour. Julian's lip curled in disgust. Commercial. It felt like a demotion, a public declaration of fallibility. He would be forced to share air with people. Strangers. It was a compromise he found utterly repellent, but necessity was the one master even he had to obey. An hour later, he was seated in the first-class cabin of a packed airliner, the muted gray fabric of the seat an offense against the custom Italian leather he was used to. He had donned a pair of dark sunglasses and a baseball cap, a flimsy disguise against a world he preferred to view from a distance. The air was stale, a blend of disinfectant and microwaved food. The low murmur of conversations, the crying of a baby somewhere in the back, it was an assault on his meticulously controlled environment. He buried his face in his tablet, trying to rebuild the sterile bubble of his private jet, but the intrusion was total. His world had been breached. The boarding process was a slow, agonizing parade of humanity. He watched with detached irritation as people shuffled past, wrestling with oversized bags and fretful children. Then he saw her. A woman with weary shoulders and a face etched with a quiet, bone-deep exhaustion. She was trying to soothe a small boy, who looked to be 5 or 6 years old, his hair a mop of unruly dark curls. The woman's clothes were neat but worn, her anxiety palpable as she clutched a frayed boarding pass. They were headed for the back of the plane, for the cramped discomfort of economy. Julian felt a flicker of something. Not pity, but a cold, clinical confirmation of the vast gulf that separated his life from theirs. The flight was delayed on the tarmac, and the boy grew restless. His small voice, piping and clear, cut through the cabin's drone. The mother, whose name Julian would soon learn was Elena, tried to quiet him with whispered promises and a small, worn-out teddy bear. A flight attendant, her smile stretched thin, approached them. Julian expected a reprimand, a silencing of the disruption. Instead, the attendant gestured toward the front of the cabin. "There are a couple of empty seats up here, ma'am. It might be a little more comfortable for you and your son." Elena's eyes widened in disbelief, then filled with a gratitude so profound it was almost painful to watch. She stammered her thanks and guided her son toward the empty row just across the aisle from Julian. Julian's irritation intensified. The disruption was now his immediate neighbor. He angled his body away, a silent declaration of his desire for solitude. The boy, however, was now quiet, fascinated by his new, spacious surroundings. He knelt on the seat, his small hands pressed against the window. Elena finally allowed herself a small, shaky breath, her body slumping into the seat with relief. She pulled a small, drawstring pouch from her purse. Julian watched from the corner of his eye as she carefully emptied its contents into her palm. A few crumpled dollar bills and a small handful of coins. She counted them slowly, her lips moving silently, her brow furrowed in concentration. It was an act of such private desperation performed in the luxurious bubble of first class that the contrast was jarring. This was her entire world, a few dollars and some loose change. His watch was worth more than her car, her apartment, her entire life. The boy, Leo, grew bored with the window. He began to play with a small object he'd pulled from his pocket. It was a chain, and dangling from it was a metal charm. It swung back and forth, catching the light. Julian's gaze drifted to it, and then snapped into focus. His breath caught in his throat. Couldn't be. It was impossible. The charm was a locket, intricately shaped like a single, stylized phoenix feather. He knew every curve, every line. It was a design he had sketched himself years ago in a college art class. He had commissioned two, one for himself, and one for the only woman he had ever truly loved, a woman named Elena. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic, alien rhythm in the calm prison of his chest. He slowly, deliberately lowered his sunglasses. He looked at the boy, truly looked at him for the first time. He saw past the cheap clothes and the smudged cheek. He saw the dark, curly hair. He saw the stubborn set of the jaw. And then the boy turned his head and Julian saw his eyes. They were a deep, startling blue, the exact shade of the summer sky. They were Julian's eyes. Time seemed to warp, to slow down and stretch into an unbearable eternity. The flight attendant's voice, announcing their imminent takeoff, was a distant echo from another universe. The boy, feeling Julian's intense stare, looked at him. A small, curious smile touched his lips. His mother, sensing the shift, turned to see what had captured her son's attention. Her gaze met Julian's. The world stopped. The air left his lungs in a silent rush. It was her, Elena Rosales. Her face was thinner, etched with lines of worry that hadn't been there before, but it was unmistakably her. The woman his family had told him had taken their money and vanished. The woman they said had wanted a different life, a life without him. The woman who had shattered his heart and turned him into the cold, calculating machine he was today. And beside her, holding a phoenix feather locket, was a boy with his eyes. A boy who was, by any logical calculation, 6 years old. The timeline, the locket, the face, it was not a coincidence. It was a reckoning. The engines roared to life, pressing him back into his seat as the plane hurtled down the runway. But Julian didn't feel the acceleration. He was in a state of freefall, his meticulously constructed world disintegrating around him. The tablet on his lap, displaying the billion-dollar deal that had been his entire focus, went dark. It was nothing. Less than nothing. He was staring at his past, his present, and his future, all embodied in a small boy and a woman he thought he'd lost forever. The plane lifted into the air, but Julian Vance was already crashing back to Earth. The flight to San Francisco was a 5-hour torment. Julian sat in a state of suspended animation, his mind a maelstrom of shock and disbelief. Every casual laugh from the boy, every gentle murmur from Elena, was a physical blow. He didn't look at them again, couldn't bring himself to. Instead, he stared blindly at the bulkhead, replaying the last time he had seen her. It was a rainy afternoon on their college campus. His father had just delivered the ultimatum. End it with the scholarship girl or be cut off from the family, the inheritance, the entire Vance empire. He had been a boy of 22, arrogant but still terrified of his father's iron will. He had chosen the empire. Upon landing, he moved like an automaton. He disembarked without a backward glance, though he could feel their presence behind him. A magnetic pull he fought with every ounce of his discipline. He bypassed the limo his company had sent, hailing a taxi instead. The Fairmont Hotel, he told the driver, his voice hoarse. He needed anonymity. He needed to think. In his penthouse suite, with its panoramic views of the city he was meant to conquer, he felt like a prisoner. He ignored the incessant buzzing of his phone, the stream of frantic texts from his sister, Victoria, and his legal team. The deal, which hours ago had been the singular purpose of his existence, was now a meaningless abstraction. He walked to the bar and poured a glass of scotch, his hand shaking slightly. Then he went to his luggage, a custom-made leather trunk, and opened a small, locked compartment. Inside was a small, rosewood box. He hadn't opened it in almost 7 years. With trembling fingers, he lifted the lid. There, nestled on a bed of black velvet, were the ghosts of his past. A handful of faded photographs of him and Elena, laughing, ridiculously young and in love. A few of her letters written in a looping, optimistic script that felt like a message from another lifetime. And in the center, a silver pendant. A single, stylized phoenix feather identical to the one the boy wore. He had told her it symbolized rebirth, their ability to rise from anything together. The irony was a bitter pill. He had been the one to burn their world to the ground. His phone buzzed again, this time with a persistence he couldn't ignore. It was Victoria. He finally answered, bracing himself for her fury. "Julian, where are you?" she demanded, her voice sharp and brittle like shattered glass. "The board is assembled. Kensei Corp is waiting." "What are you doing? This is the legacy our father built. You can't just disappear." "Something's come up," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Something's come up," she repeated, her tone dripping with incredulity. "What could possibly be more important than this? Our name, our future, it all hinges on this deal. Have you forgotten about your engagement to Isabella? Her father is on the Kensei board. This solidifies everything. This is what we've worked for." Her words, usually a rallying cry for their shared ambition, now sounded hollow and grotesque. Legacy. Engagement. Empire. They were just words, props on a stage he no longer wanted to stand on. "I have to go," he said, and hung up before she could reply. His next call was to Marcus Thorne, his head of security. Marcus was more than an employee, he was a confidant of sorts, a man whose loyalty was absolute and whose methods were ruthlessly effective. He was the only person Julian trusted. "Marcus," he said, dispensing with pleasantries. "I need you to find someone. Her name is Elena Rosales. She was on American Airlines Flight 1278 today, from Chicago to San Francisco, seat 28B. She has a son with her, about 6 years old, named Leo. I want to know everything. Where they live, where they're going, their financial status, everything. And Marcus," he added, his voice dropping, "be discreet. No one can know you're looking. Not even my sister." "Understood, Mr. Vance," Marcus replied, his tone unquestioning. The line went dead. Julian spent the next few hours pacing the suite like a caged animal. He canceled the meeting with Kensei Corp, sending shockwaves through the financial world and a tsunami of apoplectic messages from Victoria. He didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the information he was waiting for. The call came just after midnight. "I have something," Marcus said, his voice grim. "It's not good." Julian steeled himself. "Tell me." "Elena Rosales has no fixed address," Marcus began. "She was evicted from her apartment in a Chicago suburb last week. The flight today was a last-ditch effort. She had a job interview lined up here for a position as a diner waitress. She's currently checked into a place called the Starlight Motel off the freeway. It's a weekly rate place, cash only. By my estimation, she has less than $100 to her name." Julian felt a wave of nausea. He pictured her counting those coins on the plane, the quiet desperation in her eyes. He had done this to her. His weakness, his cowardice had led her to this. "That's not the worst of it," Marcus continued, his voice low. "I did a deeper check into her family, like you asked. Her parents, Maria and Hector Rosales. They died 7 years ago." "What?" Julian asked, sinking into a chair. He remembered them, a kind, hard-working couple who had welcomed him into their home, despite his family's intimidating wealth. "A car accident," Marcus said. "A single-vehicle crash on a quiet country road. Police report says brake failure. It happened about a year after you and Miss Rosales separated. The insurance payout was negligible, barely enough to cover funeral costs. She was left completely alone, and it appears she was already pregnant at the time." Julian's world tilted on its axis. Alone. Pregnant. Grieving. The carefully constructed walls of his emotional fortress crumbled, turning to dust. He saw not the powerful CEO in a luxury hotel, but the scared 22-year-old boy who had let the love of his life walk away. The boy who had been told she took a payoff, a clean and simple transaction. But this was not clean. It was a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. The weight of his guilt was suffocating, a physical presence in the room. He had not just broken her heart, he had abandoned her to face hell on earth all alone. And a dark, terrible suspicion began to form in the back of his mind. Brake failure on a quiet country road. It felt too convenient, too final. His family had wanted her gone. He had never considered just how far they would be willing to go to make that happen. The first light of dawn crept over the San Francisco skyline, but Julian hadn't slept. The luxury of the Fairmont suite felt like a mockery, its opulent furnishings a stark contrast to the grim reality he now faced. He couldn't just wire money. That was the old Julian's solution, a transactional fix for a human problem. This required something more. It required him. He needed to see her world, to understand the life his choices had forced upon her. He shed the expensive suit and the persona that went with it. He found a pair of simple jeans and a plain gray t-shirt in his luggage, clothes he kept for rare, anonymous visits to the gym. He left the designer watch on the nightstand. In the mirror, he was just a man, stripped of the armor of his wealth. It was a terrifying and liberating feeling. He took the rental car he'd insisted on, a generic sedan, and drove away from the glittering heart of the city, heading towards the urban sprawl where the Starlight Motel was located. The motel was even worse than he had imagined. It was a two-story structure with a peeling paint job and a flickering neon sign that had long since given up on the Starlight part, leaving only a sad, buzzing motel. He parked across the street, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and resolve. He saw their room, number 14, its curtains drawn tight. He saw the car parked in front of it, a battered old sedan with a dented fender and a film of grime. It was a relic held together by little more than hope. And in that moment, he saw his opening. He spent the day watching from a distance, a ghost haunting the edges of their lives. He saw Elena leave the room, her face set with a fragile determination, presumably for her job interview. Leo stayed behind, the motel manager's wife, a large, stern-looking woman, keeping a half-hearted eye on him as he sat on the walkway drawing on the concrete with a piece of chalk. Julian's chest ached with an unfamiliar emotion. He wanted to go to the boy, to speak to him, but he knew he couldn't. Not yet. Elena returned hours later, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The job was gone. Julian didn't need Marcus to tell him that Victoria's vindictive reach had likely extended even here. He watched as she forced a smile for her son, leading him back into the dim motel room. Later that evening, he saw the faint glow of a small lamp through the thin curtains. He watched their silhouettes as Elena handed Leo a steaming cup of instant noodles. She watched him eat every bite, her own hands empty. They were sharing a single meal and she was giving all of it to him. The sight was a dagger to his heart. This was the consequence of his actions. This stark, grinding poverty. This was the legacy he had actually created. The next morning, he put his plan into action. He waited until Elena and Leo emerged from their room. She was holding a map, her expression fraught with anxiety as she tried to figure out her next move. She walked to her car and slid the key into the ignition. He heard the pathetic groan of the engine as it tried and failed to turn over. Her head sank onto the steering wheel in a gesture of pure despair. This was his moment. He got out of his car and walked over, affecting a casual, unhurried gait. "Having some trouble?" he asked, his voice carefully pitched to sound friendly, unassuming. Elena looked up, startled. Her eyes, red-rimmed from crying, widened slightly in recognition. He was the man from the plane. She was immediately wary. "It's fine," she said, her tone clipped. "I can handle it." "I don't mind taking a look," he offered, gesturing to the hood. "I'm pretty good with engines. Used to work on them all the time." It was a lie, of course. The closest he'd ever come to an engine was choosing the color of his custom-built sports car. But Marcus had spent an hour on the phone with him, walking him through the most common and easily fixable issues on a car of that model and year. She hesitated, her pride warring with her desperation. Leo, who had been watching from the passenger seat, piped up. "Can you fix it, mister?" Her resolve crumbled. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." He popped the hood and stared at the greasy, complicated mess within. He felt a moment of panic, but Marcus's instructions were clear in his mind. He found the battery, just as predicted. The negative cable was loose, corroded. He borrowed a wrench from the motel's grumpy janitor and, after a few clumsy attempts that smeared his hands with grease, he managed to tighten it. "Try it now," he said, his heart hammering. Elena turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life. The relief on her face was so absolute it was like watching the sun break through the clouds. I don't know how to thank you," she stammered, fumbling for her purse. "I don't have much, but please let me pay you." "No, please," he said quickly, holding up his hands. "It was nothing. Glad I could help." While she was distracted, he walked over to the vending machine near the office. He fed a crumpled bill into it and bought a small, cheap plastic toy car. He walked back and knelt down so he was on eye level with Leo, who was now standing beside his mother. "Here," Julian said softly, holding out the toy. "For being such a patient co-pilot." Leo's eyes went wide. He looked at his mother for permission. Elena nodded, a small, grateful smile touching her lips for the first time. The boy took the car, his small fingers closing around it as if it were a precious treasure. It was a simple 99-cent piece of plastic, but the joy on Leo's face felt more valuable to Julian than the entire Kensei merger. It was the first truly good thing he had done in years. He was about to make his excuses and leave when Leo, still staring at him with unnerving intensity, spoke. "Your eyes are like mine," the boy said, his voice clear and certain. The world seemed to grind to a halt. Elena froze, her hand flying to her mouth. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. The air crackled with unspoken history. Before either adult could react, Leo reached into the pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a worn, creased photograph, its edges soft from years of handling. He held it up for Julian to see. It was a picture of a much younger Elena, her face full and radiant, her hand resting on her swollen, pregnant belly. And standing beside her, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders, was a 21-year-old Julian Vance, his face alight with a love so pure and unguarded it was almost unrecognizable. "See?" Leo said, pointing a small finger at the photo. "Mommy says my daddy was a brave man who had to go away on a long trip. Is that you? Are you my daddy?" The directness of the question, the innocent hope shining in his son's eyes, shattered the last of Julian's composure. The handyman persona evaporated, the careful lies turned to ash. He was exposed not by an angry board of directors or a rival corporation, but by a 6-year-old boy holding a faded photograph. He looked from the boy to Elena, whose face was a mask of terror and heartbreak. The truth was out, raw and undeniable, in the grimy parking lot of a rundown motel. He had come here to enter their world, and in one breathtaking moment, he had become the epicenter of its potential destruction. Back in his hotel suite, Julian felt the walls closing in. The child's question, "Are you my daddy?" echoed in the vast, empty space, a judgment and a plea all in one. He had fled the motel parking lot with a mumbled excuse, leaving Elena and Leo staring after him, a tableau of confusion and fear. He had seen the terror in Elena's eyes, the primal fear of a mother who believed the wolf had finally come to her door. He called Marcus. "Victoria," he said, his voice a low growl. "I want to know what she's been doing for the last 48 hours. Every call, every email, every meeting. I don't care how you get it. I want to know." While he waited, the rage built within him. He thought of Elena's defeated face when she returned from the interview. He thought of the single cup of noodles. It wasn't just his past cowardice that had led them here. It was an active, ongoing campaign. He was certain of it. His sister, the self-appointed guardian of the Vance legacy, would see Elena and Leo not as people, but as liabilities to be neutralized. The proof came faster than he expected. Marcus, with his particular set of skills, had tapped into the Vance global servers. Victoria's digital trail was a roadmap of her cruelty. There was the email to a contact at the restaurant chain, politely suggesting they reconsider Elena's application due to a potentially unstable background. There was a payment, routed through 3 shell corporations, to a private investigator tasked with finding and reporting on Elena's movements. And most chillingly, there was a scheduled call for later that day with a high-powered family law attorney, the subject line simply reading, "Custody Matter." The cold fury that settled over Julian was absolute. This was no longer just about making amends for the past. It was a war to protect the future. A future he hadn't even known he had until yesterday. He instructed Marcus to redouble his efforts on the investigation into the death of Elena's parents. "I want to know who owned the garage that last serviced their car. I want to know the name of every mechanic who worked there. I want to know if anyone suddenly came into money around that time. Dig, Marcus. Dig until you hit bone." His next move was the most difficult. He had to go back. He had to face Elena. He drove back to the Starlight Motel, but this time he didn't come as a handyman. He drove the luxury car he'd rented at the airport, wore the expensive clothes he was accustomed to. He was done hiding. He knocked on the door of room 14, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. Elena opened the door a crack, her body language defensive, ready to slam it shut. Leo was hiding behind her legs, peeking out. When she saw who it was, her face hardened. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice laced with ice. "We need to talk," Julian said quietly. "Please, Elena. It's important." He saw the conflict in her eyes, the fear warring with a desperate need for answers. Finally, she opened the door and let him in. The room was small, clean, but overwhelmingly bleak. It smelled of antiseptic and poverty. Julian stood awkwardly in the center of the room, the sheer size of him seeming to shrink the space even further. "I know what you must be thinking," he started, his voice strained. You think I'm here to take him, aren't you? She shot back, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Isn't that what powerful men like you do? You break things and then you come back to claim the pieces you want. Her words were a direct hit and he deserved them. I deserved that, he admitted. And you're right to hate me. I was a coward, Elena. I listened to my family, to my father. They told me you took money to leave, that you wanted nothing to do with me. I was weak enough and arrogant enough to believe them. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, the ghost of an old pain. Money, she whispered, her voice cracking. They offered me money. I threw it in their faces. I wrote to you, Julian. For months. I called. They told me you had changed your number, that you had moved on, that you threatened to call the police for harassment if I contacted you again. The puzzle pieces slammed into place, forming a picture of breathtaking cruelty. I never got them, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I swear to you, Elena, I never got a single letter. He pulled out his phone and showed her the evidence Marcus had uncovered, the intercepted emails from Victoria, the payment to the investigator. This isn't just about the past. My sister, Victoria. She knows I found you. She's the one who made sure you didn't get that job. She's trying to paint you as an unfit mother. She's trying to take Leo. Elena stared at the screen, her face paling as she absorbed the calculated malice. The anger in her eyes was slowly replaced by a dawning horror. She had thought she was fighting against fate, against bad luck. She never imagined she was fighting against the targeted, vindictive power of the Vance family. Just then, Marcus called. Julian answered, putting it on speaker. You were right, Mr. Vance, Marcus said, his voice tight. The mechanic who signed off on the Rosales car service quit his job 2 weeks after the accident. He paid cash for a new house a month later. It took some persuasion, but he talked. He said a woman paid him $10,000 to mess up the brake lines, but make it look like wear and tear. He didn't know who she was, but he described her perfectly. Tall, blonde, expensive suit. It was Victoria. The air in the motel room turned to ice. Elena let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth as the full, monstrous truth crashed down on her. Her parents hadn't died in an accident. They had been murdered. Murdered to isolate her, to leave her completely destitute and alone, to erase her from Julian's world. Julian's own rage was a white-hot inferno. His sister hadn't just lied. She hadn't just manipulated. She was a killer. He looked at Elena, who was now openly weeping, silent tears streaming down her face. He looked at Leo, who was watching them with wide, frightened eyes, not understanding the words but feeling the crushing weight of their meaning. The battle lines had been drawn. Victoria had escalated this from a matter of family lies to a matter of life and death. Julian knew in that moment that he would stop at nothing. He would burn his father's empire to the ground to protect this woman and this child. He knelt in front of Elena, taking her trembling hands in his. I am going to fix this, he said, his voice raw with a vow that was more sacred than any business contract. She will not touch you. She will not touch our son. I swear it. A new, fragile alliance was forged in that grim motel room, born from shared pain and a desperate need for justice. They were no longer just a broken couple from the past, they were partners in a war against a monster who wore the face of his family. The stakes had been raised to an unbearable level. It was a fight for their lives and for the soul of their son. The air in Julian's penthouse suite crackled with tension. He had moved Elena and Leo from the motel in the middle of the night, installing them in a secure corporate apartment he kept under a different name, a place Victoria knew nothing about. Marcus's team stood guard outside, a silent promise of protection. For the first time in 7 years, Leo was sleeping in a proper bed, his toy car clutched in his hand. Elena, though still shaken to her core, had a flicker of fight back in her eyes. The terror was being replaced by a cold, hard anger. Julian stood by the window looking out over the city. He had spent the morning on the phone with his legal team, not the corporate sharks who handled mergers, but the cutthroat litigators who buried secrets and destroyed enemies. The plan was in motion. But first, there was something he had to do himself. He needed to see her face. He needed to see the monster he had once called his sister. He drove to the headquarters of Vance Global, the gleaming skyscraper that was the monument to his family's power. He strode through the lobby, his face a granite mask. Employees scurried out of his way, sensing the storm that was brewing. He didn't take the executive elevator. He took the one that went to the boardroom floor where he knew Victoria was in the middle of a damage control meeting regarding the scuttled Kensei deal. He didn't knock. He threw the heavy oak doors open with such force that they slammed against the walls. The room went silent. A dozen vice presidents stared at him, their mouths agape. Victoria, standing at the head of the long mahogany table, looked up, her expression a mixture of fury and surprise. "Everyone, out," Julian commanded, his voice dangerously quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "Now." They scrambled to obey, gathering their papers and practically tripping over each other to escape the charged atmosphere. Within seconds, it was just the two of them. The silence was heavy, suffocating. "How dare you?" Victoria began, her voice trembling with rage. "You humiliate me, you sabotage the deal of a lifetime, and then you barge in here like a common thug. Was it a common thug you hired to kill Elena's parents?" Julian interrupted, his words like shards of ice. The color drained from Victoria's face. For a fraction of a second, he saw pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes. But she recovered instantly, her features hardening into a mask of indignant denial. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, her voice cold and steady. "You're clearly having some sort of breakdown. Grieving a deal, perhaps?" Julian walked slowly toward her, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous room. He stopped on the other side of the table and slid a file across the polished surface. "His name is Frank Miller," Julian said. "A mechanic. He has a very clear memory of a tall, blonde woman in an expensive suit paying him $10,000 in cash to ensure a set of brake lines would fail. He gave a sworn, videotaped deposition this morning." He slid another file across the table. "These are the phone records, showing your calls to a private investigator, tasking him with tracking a nuisance from your brother's past. And these," he added, tossing down a sheaf of printed emails, "are your messages to the restaurant, ensuring Elena Rosales would remain unemployed and desperate." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "The game is over, Victoria." She stared at the evidence, her carefully constructed composure beginning to fracture. Her breath came in ragged gasps, but she did not crumble. Instead, a chilling transformation took place. The mask of civility fell away, revealing the ugly, twisted core beneath. A sneer twisted her lips. "I did it for you," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "I did it for this family, for our legacy." Father knew. He agreed. She was a nobody, a gold-digging parasite who would have ruined you. She would have chained you to a life of mediocrity, saddled you with a child, and bled you dry. "I protected you. I protected our name. Some sacrifices have to be made for greatness, Julian." That girl, her parents, they were acceptable losses. Her justification, so devoid of remorse, so steeped in a warped sense of entitlement, was more horrifying than any confession. She truly believed she was the hero of this story. She saw no crime, only a necessary, if unpleasant, business decision. She felt nothing. Julian stared at her, not with hatred anymore, but with a profound and desolate pity. "Legacy?" he said softly. "You talk about legacy? You destroyed the only legacy that ever mattered." He straightened up, his decision absolute. He pulled out his phone and made 2 brief calls. The first was to the company's general counsel. Victoria Vance is to be removed from the board of Vance Global effective immediately. Her access to all company property and accounts is terminated. Security will escort her from the building. His second call was to the private bank that managed their family trust. "Per the discretionary authority granted to me in my father's will, I am freezing all of Victoria Vance's access to all family funds. Indefinitely." Victoria stared at him, her face a canvas of disbelief and fury. "You can't do this," she stammered. "I am a Vance. This company, this money, it's mine as much as it is yours." "You are nothing to me," Julian said, his voice final. He turned and walked to the door, not looking back. "Security is on their way. I suggest you gather your personal effects." He left her there, standing amidst the ruins of her power, a queen dethroned in her own throne room. He went directly from the sterile cold of the boardroom to the quiet warmth of the apartment where Elena and Leo were waiting. He found Elena sitting on the couch, staring into space, while Leo slept peacefully in the next room. He sat down beside her, the weight of the day settling upon him. "It's done," he said quietly. "She's been removed from the company. Her money is cut off." Elena looked at him, her eyes searching his. "And that's it? She gets to walk away?" "No," Julian said, shaking his head. "That's just the beginning. The mechanic's testimony is with the district attorney's office. A warrant will be issued. But she's smart and she's cornered. She will try to run or she will try to fight back. She might even try to come after you or Leo." He took her hand. It was cold, but it didn't tremble. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, he said, his voice earnest, stripped of all artifice. After everything I've done, everything I failed to do. But I am asking you now. Trust me. Let me protect you. Let me fight for you. I've spent my entire life building walls to keep people out. Now all I want to do is build one to keep you and our son safe. He laid out his plan, a public revelation, a controlled explosion that would leave Victoria with nowhere to hide. It was risky. It would expose them all to the harsh glare of the media. But it was the only way to guarantee she could never hurt them again. Elena listened, her gaze never leaving his face. She saw the man he was now, not the cold stranger on the plane or the ghost from her past. She saw a man ravaged by guilt but driven by a fierce, newfound purpose. She saw the father of her child finally ready to claim that title in more than just biology. She squeezed his hand, a small but significant gesture. Okay, she whispered, her voice firming with resolve. Okay, Julian. We'll do it your way. The battle lines were drawn. The confrontation had been made and the commitment was sealed. Together, they would face the storm, ready to expose the truth no matter the cost. The annual Vance Foundation Charity Gala was the crown jewel of the San Francisco social season. It was an event Victoria had meticulously orchestrated for years, a grand performance of philanthropy designed to launder their corporate ruthlessness into public adoration. This year, it was to be her masterpiece, a celebration of the now-defunct Kensei merger. It was the perfect stage for her downfall. Julian arrived not with a socialite on his arm, but with Elena and Leo by his side. They walked into the grand ballroom and a ripple of shock spread through the assembled crowd of billionaires, politicians, and media personalities. Elena was elegant in a simple but beautifully cut dark blue dress Julian had insisted on buying her, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to the glittering artifice around her. Leo, in a small, neat suit, clung tightly to his mother's hand, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. They were an enigma, a puzzle the city's elite immediately began trying to solve in hushed whispers. Victoria, holding court near the stage, saw them enter. Her champagne flute froze halfway to her lips. Julian watched the flicker of panic, the momentary loss of control, before her mask of gracious hostess snapped back into place. She was trapped. To cause a scene would be to ruin her own party. She had no choice but to watch, to wait, and to wonder what hell he was about to unleash. The evening progressed, a slow burn of tension under a veneer of polite conversation. Julian introduced Elena simply as a dear friend, a description that only fueled the rampant speculation. When it was time for the speeches, Victoria took the stage, delivering a flawless, impassioned plea for donations, her voice ringing with a sincerity that made Julian's stomach turn. She spoke of family, of legacy, of building a better world for the next generation. Then it was Julian's turn. He walked to the podium, the ballroom silent and expectant. He looked out at the sea of powerful faces, then his gaze found Victoria, standing at the side of the stage, a tight, proprietary smile on her face. Good evening, he began, his voice calm and steady. My sister speaks of legacy. Of the world we leave for our children. And tonight I want to talk about that too. I want to talk about the truth. He nodded to a technician in the back of the room. The massive screen behind the stage, which had been displaying the foundation's logo, flickered to life. It was not a slideshow of smiling children or community projects. It was a scanned image of a letter written in a desperate, looping hand. I am pregnant, the letter read. Julian, please, I need you. Your family is trying to pay me off. I love you. It was one of the letters Elena had written, one he had never received. A wave of gasps swept through the room. Victoria's face went white. For 7 years, Julian continued, his voice resonating with suppressed pain, I was led to believe that the woman I loved had abandoned me. But the truth is, my family built a wall of lies to keep us apart. Another image flashed on the screen, Victoria's email to the restaurant, a cold-blooded assassination of Elena's character. Then another, the bank transfer to the private investigator. This was not enough, Julian said, his voice dropping, becoming heavy with grief. To ensure their lie was permanent, they sought to isolate her completely. To leave her with nothing, and no 1 inch. The screen changed again, this time showing a picture of Elena's parents, smiling and happy. Maria and Hector Rosales. Good people. Hard-working people. They died in a car accident 7 years ago. Or so the report said. The ballroom was utterly silent now, the air thick with horrified fascination. Victoria was shaking her head, whispering, no, no, no. But her words were lost. But tonight, the truth of their legacy has its own voice, Julian announced. The screen flickered again, this time to a video. It was the mechanic, Frank Miller, his face shadowed, His voice distorted but his words terrifyingly clear. "She paid me in cash," he said. "The lady in the suit said she wanted me to fix the brakes so they'd fail after a few miles. Said they were bad people who deserved it. I never knew. I swear I never knew they would die." A collective cry of horror erupted from the audience. Victoria stumbled back, her hand flying to her throat, her eyes wide with feral panic. This was it. The final, devastating blow. The public, irrefutable proof. But Julian had one more secret to reveal, the final twist of the knife. "My father was a complicated man," he said, his voice ringing with a strange mix of condemnation and closure. "He was complicit in these lies. But it seems at the end of his life he had a flicker of conscience. He left a confession with his lawyer, a sworn statement detailing my sister's actions, to be unsealed in the event that the true Vance heir was ever threatened." He held up a sealed envelope. "The true heir isn't a company or a bank account. It's my son." As if on cue, the grand doors of the ballroom burst open. Not waiters or late-arriving guests, but uniformed police officers, their movements calm and purposeful. They walked directly toward the stage, their destination unmistakable. Victoria, seeing them, let out a strangled sob. Her perfect world, her flawless reputation had been systematically and publicly dismantled. She was no longer a philanthropist, a socialite, a titan of industry. She was just a cornered killer. The officers reached her, speaking in low, professional tones. They took her by the arms. The click of the handcuffs fastening around her wrists echoed in the silent ballroom, a sound more final than any gavel. Her public disgrace was absolute, captured by 100 cell phone cameras, broadcast live to the world. The Vance legacy, the one she had killed to protect, was now a legacy of shame. In the stunned silence that followed her removal, Julian stepped down from the podium. He walked through the crowd, which parted for him as if he were royalty. He ignored the shocked faces, the whispers, the dawning comprehension in the eyes of his so-called peers. He only had eyes for two people. He reached Elena and Leo. He didn't say a word. He simply knelt down on the floor of the opulent ballroom so he was eye to eye with his son. The ruthless CEO, the corporate raider, was gone. In his place was just a father, his face stripped bare of everything but love and regret. Tears welled in his eyes and traced paths down his cheeks. Leo, who had watched the entire proceeding with a child's solemn confusion, seemed to understand this gesture better than any of the words that had been spoken. He reached out his small hand and gently, tentatively, touched Julian's wet cheek. It was a gesture of forgiveness, of acceptance, of pure, uncomplicated love. Elena placed her hand on Julian's shoulder, her own tears falling freely. In the midst of the wreckage of their old lives, surrounded by the debris of lies and betrayal, a new family was being born. The flashbulbs of the press, who had now swarmed into the room, erupted around them, capturing the moment not of a scandal, but of a reunion. The image that would grace the front pages the next day would not be of Victoria's arrest, but of the billionaire tycoon on his knees, his wronged love standing over him, and the child who had brought them all back from the brink, finally united. 1 year later, the world was a different place. The towering glass headquarters of Vance Global no longer held any appeal for Julian. He had stepped down as CEO, retaining a controlling interest but entrusting the day-to-day operations to a hand-picked successor. The relentless hum of the corporate world had been replaced by the gentle sounds of a life being lived. He was not in a penthouse, but in the sun-drenched backyard of a comfortable, sprawling house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, a place chosen for its good schools and safe streets, not its proximity to the financial district. He was on his hands and knees on the soft grass, deeply engrossed in a complex Lego construction project with Leo. They were building a castle complete with a lopsided tower and a very wobbly drawbridge. Leo, now 7, chattered excitedly, explaining the intricate defensive strategies of his plastic knights. Julian listened, truly listened, a smile playing on his lips. He was wearing faded jeans and a simple, soft cotton sweater. The perpetual tension that had once lived in his shoulders was gone, replaced by a relaxed, easy posture. The cold, guarded look in his eyes had vanished, supplanted by a warm, patient light. He looked up as Leo placed the final Lego brick on the tower. "It's perfect," Julian said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. He was no longer building an empire of steel and stock options. He was building a fortress of love and laughter, one plastic brick at a time. The Vance Foundation had been gutted and rebuilt from the ground up. It was now the Rosales Vance Foundation, and its new mission was not to burnish a corporate image, but to seek justice. With a significant portion of his personal fortune, Julian had endowed it to provide top-tier legal aid to families who had been wronged by the powerful and wealthy, a direct atonement for the sins of his own family. He had used his power not to acquire more, but to dismantle the very systems of influence that Victoria had so expertly manipulated. His new legacy was not one of profit, but of restitution. Victoria was serving a life sentence, her appeals exhausted, her name a permanent stain. Julian felt no triumph in this, only a quiet, somber sense of justice finally served. Elena emerged from the house carrying a tray with 3 tall glasses of freshly squeezed lemonade. She had enrolled in a university program for social work, her quiet strength and deep empathy now being channeled into a new purpose. The weary anxiety that had once shadowed her features was gone, replaced by a serene confidence. She set the tray down on the patio table and watched Julian and Leo playing, a soft smile on her face. Their journey had been forged in fire and betrayal, but they had emerged from the flames stronger and together. Julian caught her eye and his smile deepened. He walked over to her, wiping a smudge of dirt from his hands onto his jeans. He took her hand, his touch gentle and familiar. "I was just thinking," he said softly, "about how I spent so many years chasing the future. I completely missed the present." He led her into the living room. On the mantelpiece, above a fireplace that was often lit on cool evenings, sat a simple, elegant wooden frame. Inside, against a backdrop of black velvet, were 2 objects, side by side. The phoenix feather locket that had once belonged to Elena, and the matching pendant that Julian had kept locked away for so long. They were finally together, symbols of a love that had been burned to ash but had, against all odds, been reborn. He turned to her, his blue eyes, the same eyes he saw every day in his son's face, full of a deep and abiding love. He didn't pull out a massive diamond or make a grand, theatrical gesture. He simply took both of her hands in his. "Elena," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to be the man that you and Leo have always deserved?" Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of all the love and forgiveness and hope for the future they had built together. "Yes, Julian. 1,000 times yes." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in a quiet embrace, the sound of their son's happy laughter drifting in from the backyard. Julian looked over her shoulder at the boy playing freely in the sunlight, and a profound sense of peace settled over him, a peace he had never known was possible. All those years, he had been building an empire of things, of power and prestige. He had been so wrong. He held Elena tighter, realizing the simple, earth-shattering truth. "All that time," he said softly, his voice a vow against her hair, "I thought my legacy was the company, the name, the wealth. I didn't realize I already had a legacy. He is my legacy. You are my legacy. This is all that ever mattered."